You know, people have this picture in their heads that electricity is like water running through a pipe, zipping along inside the copper wire like tiny cars on a highway. It's a nice picture, simple, easy to imagine. The only trouble is, it's wrong. Completely wrong. See, the real story, the true, marvelous, mind-bending story is that energy doesn't actually flow in the wires at all. No, the wire is just the stage. The real action happens around it, in the space we usually ignore. And when you understand that, suddenly electricity stops being this mysterious, invisible thing and becomes a beautiful dance of fields, forces, and interaction. Today, I want to take you on a little journey, not just to correct a misunderstanding, but to show you how astonishing the world really is when you look closely, because the universe isn't just stranger than we imagine. It's stranger than we can imagine. And that begins with one simple idea. Energy doesn't flow in the wires. When most people flip a switch, they have this comforting picture in their minds of electricity scurrying through wires like tiny beads rushing along a string. They imagine the wire stuffed full of energetic particles that hurry from one end to the other obediently, carrying power to a lamp or a fan or whatever gadget happens to be waiting at the other side. It feels intuitive, almost inevitable, as if the world simply must work that way because that's the easiest way to imagine it. But nature doesn't shape itself to our convenience, and it certainly doesn't care about the pictures that feel simple in our heads. The truth is more surprising, and once you see it, more beautiful, because the energy that powers our world doesn't actually travel inside the wire. It flows in the space around it. At first, that seems outrageous. The wire is right there, solid, familiar. You can touch it. You can coil it. You can see it. And yet the part that actually carries the energy is not something you can hold or even point to in the usual sense. It lives out in the empty regions that your eyes glide past and your instincts ignore. And this turns out to be a wonderful reminder that the universe hides its greatest truths right in front of us, so close that we forget to look closely. This idea that energy flows around the wire is not just an electrical fact, it's a lesson in how the world quietly insists that we stay curious, that we refuse to settle for comfortable illusions, that we remain willing to replace a simple picture with a correct one, even when the correct one is stranger, more abstract, and less convenient. Imagine for a moment that you're standing in front of a lamp that's turned off. There's a wire leading to it, and somewhere at the other end is a power source waiting patiently. Now you flip the switch. At the very instant that lamp begins to glow, it's easy to believe that electrons sprinted through the wire from the switch to the bulb like runners, delivering their little packets of energy. But that isn't what happened. The electrons themselves barely move. They nudge one another like a long line of people passing small pushes through a crowd. Their average drift is painfully slow. If energy depended on them physically traveling from one end to the other, your lamp would take far longer to light up. But it doesn't. It responds almost immediately. So something else must be at work, something that can move at nearly the speed of light, something that doesn't depend on the sluggish march of electrons. What actually flows quickly, what actually carries the energy to the lamp is the electromagnetic field that forms around the wire the moment it's connected to a power source. The wire simply guides this field, telling it which direction to go. The electrons inside jostle and adjust slightly, responding to the field, but they're not delivering the energy themselves. Instead, they're changing just enough to create the conditions for the field to exist. And the field is where the energy is stored and transmitted. It's as if the wire is not a pipe carrying fluid, but a set of rails guiding a train of invisible forces that do the real work. You might ask, if the energy is in the space outside the wire, why doesn't it just fly off into the air? The answer is wonderfully subtle. The field forms a kind of structure arranged perfectly around the wire because the charges in the wire create it. The surrounding space becomes a highway of sorts, a pathway carved not out of matter but out of the rules of physics themselves. The energy flows along this path, hugging the wire, not because the wire absorbs it, but because the wire shapes the field in just the right way. This is an extraordinary arrangement. Matter inside the wire determines the pattern of energy outside the wire, and that pattern, in turn, drives the movement of matter inside the wire. This interplay between matter and field is not just a fact about electricity, it's a metaphor for how progress works in our lives. Too often, we imagine that energy, motivation, creativity, insight must flow directly through the visible channels. We think progress must come from obvious places, a bigger talent, a clearer plan, a straight path. But just like the energy around the wire, the real power often travels through invisible structures, the habits we don't notice, the influences that surround us, the environment we live in, the expectations we carry, and the ideas we absorb from the world. These things may not be as tangible as a wire, but they determine the direction and strength of our energy far more than the things we can easily point to. Look again at the wire. It would be easy to say the wire is responsible for everything because it's the part we can touch. Yet inside the wire the electrons crawl, while outside the wire the energy streams at nearly the speed of light. In the same way, our visible actions can appear to be the source of our progress, but the invisible forces around us, the mindset we cultivate, the curiosity we nurture, the questions we ask, are what actually propel us forward. If you want to change your results, you must change the field around your actions. A wire without the right electromagnetic field is a useless piece of metal. A person without the right environment ideas is no different. One of the most surprising things about the energy flowing outside the wire is that it doesn't need a physical tube or tunnel to contain it. It simply follows the direction that the fields dictate. That's a fascinating idea because it means the path of energy is determined by relationships, not by rigid structure. The wire and the charges inside create a pattern, and the energy responds to that pattern. Your life works the same way. You don't need a perfect structure, a perfect plan, or a perfect set of conditions. You need the right relationships between your goals and actions, between your beliefs and habits, between your curiosity and your willingness to explore. When people encounter this idea for the first time, that energy flows around the wire, they often feel a sense of discomfort. How can that be? They ask. Why didn't anyone tell me this earlier? It's the same discomfort people feel when they discover that the world is not as solid as. It seems that atoms are mostly empty space, or that time doesn't pass at the same rate for everyone. But discomfort is a sign that your understanding is expanding. It's a signal that you're stepping out of a convenient picture and into a more accurate one. Growth always feels that way. You outgrow ideas the same way you outgrow clothes. Slowly, then suddenly, with a mixture of nostalgia and relief, consider the fields themselves. They are invisible, but they are everywhere. They hold the energy, they transmit the power, and they govern the behavior of the electrons inside the wire. Yet we usually pretend they're not there because our senses aren't built to detect them. That ought to humble us. It reminds us that the world contains layers upon layers of structure beyond our immediate perception. And if that's true in physics, it's certainly true in life. The forces that shape us most deeply, expectations, patterns, assumptions, often lie outside our immediate awareness. But just like the electromagnetic fields around a wire, they determine the direction in which our energy flows. Now picture the space around a simple circuit with a battery and a bulb. If you could see the energy flowing, you'd see it streaming through. The empty space around the wires, curving and folding in elegant patterns as it races toward the bulb, which glows not because it drank energy from inside the wire, but because it was bathed in energy from the world around it. And this picture is more than just correct, it's inspiring, because it shows that power doesn't have to come from a physical path. It doesn't have to squeeze its way through a narrow channel. It can move freely, guided only by invisible principles. There's another lesson here too. When the wire bends, the field bends along with it. When the wire twists, the field twists. When the wire branches, the field splits. The energy listens to the path you create. Even when you can't see how, life responds to your choices in the same way. Change your habits just a little and the field around your life reforms itself. Change your assumptions and the energy of your actions flows differently. Change your direction. No matter how small the angle, and the long-term path of your life shifts dramatically. A tiny bend in the wire completely changes the flow of energy around it. A tiny bend in your decisions changes the flow of opportunity around you. If electrons actually barreled through wires carrying the energy, then a kink or twist in the wire would slow everything down significantly. But because the energy flows around the wire, not in it, the wire can be bent, shaped, twisted, coiled, or stretched, and the energy will still reach its destination with remarkable efficiency. That's a powerful metaphor for resilience. The structure might bend, but the flow remains strong. Your life may twist unexpectedly. Your plans may coil in strange directions. But if you've built the right field around your self-curiosity, persistence, clarity of purpose, the energy of your progress will continue to move forward. Another fascinating thing happens when the power source is removed. The field collapses almost instantly, like a soap bubble popping. The energy isn't stored in the wire. It was always outside in the field, and as soon as the conditions that sustain the field disappear, the energy flow vanishes. This too is a reminder the conditions around you matter more than the actions you're performing. You can be the most talented person in the world, but if the conditions around you, the field of influence, ideas, and support aren't present, your potential collapses just as quickly. So focus on the field you cultivate, not just the actions you take. Look again at the electrons. They do move, but hardly at all. Yet they make the entire phenomenon possible. They reshape the field when pushed by a voltage. They adjust themselves just enough to create the patterns that allow energy to flow. That's another lesson. You don't have to move dramatically to create a dramatic change. Sometimes a small adjustment in your thinking sets off a vast rearrangement in the possibilities around you. Sometimes a slight push in a new direction creates a completely new pattern in the field of your life. If you could somehow freeze time and watch the energy flowing around a circuit, you'd see something astonishing. You'd see that the energy doesn't see. Worry about the wire for its own sake. It cares only about the configuration of the field. In this sense, the wire is just a suggestion, a guide, a physical hint about where the field should be strong and where it should be weak. The energy listens not to the matter, but to the rules that matter creates. This is a profound idea. It means that the real power lies not in physical things, but in the relationships between them. And this is just as true in personal growth as it is in physics. The relationships between your beliefs, habits, and goals define your trajectory more than any single action. You may have heard someone say, stories shape the world. But a more accurate statement might be, the invisible structures shape the world. Fields shape the path of energy. Environments shape the path of human effort. Cultures shape the path of innovation. Expectations shape the path of achievement. And because these structures are invisible, we often underestimate them. But they are always there, always influencing us, always guiding the energy of our choices. Once you see that energy flows outside the wire, you begin to see that the world is full of invisible flows. Knowledge flows between people who never touch. Influence flows through networks of minds. Opportunity flows through paths that are shaped not by direct contact, but by patterns of behavior. And when you begin to understand these flows, you learn to position yourself where the energy is richest. Just as a wire doesn't create the energy, but merely shapes its path, you don't create all the opportunities in your life. You create the conditions for those opportunities to flow toward you. Think of a radio antenna. It receives energy from waves that fill the air. Waves that were always there, waiting for something to respond to them. Your mind works the same way. It doesn't create every insight or idea. It simply receives and shapes the energy already present in the world of knowledge. When you tune yourself properly, when your curiosity is alive and your attention is sharp, you begin to pick up the signals that were invisible to you before. You begin to notice patterns, ideas, possibilities that had been swirling around you, unnoticed, like electromagnetic waves waiting for the right antenna. And here's the most astonishing part of all: the energy outside the wire flows because the wire exists. But the wire alone cannot account for the energy. In the same way, you matter because you shape the flow of meaning in the world. You create paths for ideas. You influence the way others think. You carve channels for possibility. Yet the force that flows through these channels is bigger than any one person. It comes from the vast field of human experience, knowledge, creativity, and imagination. You are both the wire and the shaper of the field. There is a quiet miracle in the idea that energy flows through empty space. It tells us that emptiness is not emptiness. Stillness is not stillness. What looks invisible is often essential. It tells us that the world is full of structure and possibility that we cannot see unless we learn to look with deeper understanding. It tells us that the greatest truths are often hiding in the spaces we ignore. And once you understand that energy flows outside the wire, you begin to respect the invisible. You begin to look for the hidden patterns in your life. You begin to ask better questions. You begin to challenge the simple pictures you've carried with you from childhood. You begin to appreciate that the real world, the fascinating, intricate, profound world, is richer and stranger than the one you imagined. When you flip a switch today, look at the wire and remember, the energy is not inside it. It's moving. G through the world around it, guided by invisible rules, shaped by subtle structure, responding to forces you cannot see, but that you can understand if you choose to. And your life works the same way. The energy you need is already flowing all around you. The question is whether you've shaped your field in a way that lets it reach you, whether you've arranged your habits and beliefs to guide that flow, whether you've built the right structures to harness that invisible power. Because once you do, the energy of your potential doesn't need to squeeze through narrow channels. It flows through the open space of your curiosity, your courage, and your willingness to see the world as it really is rather than as you once assumed it to be. Most people go through life with a certain kind of picture in their minds, a picture so persistent and comfortable that it becomes almost invisible. One of those pictures is the idea that electricity flows inside a wire as if the wire were a pipe, and the electrons were little droplets of water rushing through it. It feels simple. It feels intuitive. It feels right because it doesn't challenge our expectations. But nature has a mischievous habit of refusing to sit inside the shapes we draw for it. And once you start looking closely, you notice that the picture you've carried for years doesn't quite fit the reality around you. Energy doesn't flow inside the wire, it flows around it. At first glance, this seems like one of those odd technical facts that might matter only to engineers. But the more you explore it, the more profound it becomes. Because this idea isn't just about electricity. It's about how the world works. It's about how progress works. It's about how reality hides its essential truth in places we rarely bother to look. This one fact that energy flows around a wire contains a lesson that applies far beyond circuits and electronics. It holds a message about the invisible structures guiding your life, shaping your choices, influencing your progress, and channeling your potential. Imagine you have a wire on the table. You can roll it between your fingers, bend it, twist it. It's a solid physical object. You might even tell yourself, this is where the electricity travels. But if you could see the true flow of energy, the real motion that powers your devices, you would see something entirely different. The energy is not inside the metal. It is streaming through the space around it, weaving along the outside like a river clinging to the bank of a shoreline. The wire isn't the river. It's the shape that tells the river where to go. This is a deeply counterintuitive idea. When you look at a lamp turning on, you feel certain the energy must be traveling inside the wire because that's the only part you can see. But what we can see is very often the least important part of the story. The energy moves through the electromagnetic field that forms around the wire. The electrons inside barely crawl. Their drift speed is ridiculously slow, millimeters per hour in many cases. If the lamp depended on their physical movement, you would be staring at darkness long enough to wonder whether you forgot to pay the electricity bill. But you don't. The light responds almost instantly because the energy travels through the field outside the wire at nearly the speed of light. That's the first layer of the lesson. The visible channel is not the actual channel. The real path of power is hidden in the space around it. Think of the wire as a guide, not a container. The electrons inside rearrange themselves just enough to create the condition for the field to exist, and that field carries the energy. The wire is like a map, not a highway. The energy is like a traveler who doesn't need a road but follows the contour of the landscape. The electrons set the landscape. The field follows, and the energy flows where the field leads. If you step back and look at this carefully, it becomes a metaphor for something far larger, something crucial to understand if you want to thrive in the world. You are surrounded by invisible fields in your life, mental fields, emotional fields, cultural fields, social fields. These fields, like the electromagnetic one around the wire, shape the direction of your energy. They determine how fast your effort turns into progress, how quickly your ideas translate into action, how easily your motivation transfers into results. And yet, just like the electromagnetic field, these life fields are invisible. You can only see their effects. You must learn to sense them. Otherwise, you will mistake the wire for the energy flow itself and wonder why effort doesn't equal outcome. Think about opportunities. They rarely arrive from the visible channels you expect. They flow through the invisible field, your environment, your habits, your mindset, your network, your beliefs, your willingness to explore. These factors aren't obvious like a wire you can hold. They are the space around the wire, the region where the real energy moves. If your environment is poorly structured, if your mindset is rigid, if your habits don't align with your goals, then your energy, like the electromagnetic energy around a wire that's poorly connected, will scatter, weaken, or fail to reach its destination. Here's another remarkable piece of the story. The energy outside the wire stays close to it because the wire and the charges inside shape the field in just the right way. The field lines bend, curve, anchor themselves according to the pattern the charges create. In other words, the wire shapes the invisible world around it, and the invisible world carries the energy. This mirrors a principle that applies beautifully to human development. You shape your actions, your routines, your expectations, your small choices, and these choices create an invisible structure, a psychological field that surrounds your life. That invisible structure determines where your energy goes, how quickly it moves, how efficiently it arrives, and what outcomes it ultimately produces. When you change the shape of the wire even slightly, the field changes instantly. Energy flows differently. The entire pattern reorganizes itself. You don't have to push the energy. You just reshape the structure, and the energy follows the new path. Likewise, when you make even a small change in your habits, in your thought patterns, in your environment, in your assumptions, you change the invisible field around your life, and then the energy of your effort naturally flows along the new path you've created. You don't have to force it. You simply have to shape the field. People often believe that dramatic progress requires dramatic action, but physics tells us something different. Sometimes a tiny bend in the wire drastically changes the path of energy around it. And in life, a tiny shift in perspective drastically changes the path of possibility around you. Change one word you say to yourself in the morning. Change one assumption about what you can learn. Change one daily ritual. These small adjustments, like tiny changes in charge distribution inside a wire, create changes in the field that produce exponentially larger changes in the flow of energy. Now picture what happens when a circuit is broken. You disconnect the battery, and instantly the field around the wire collapses. It disappears. The end. Energy stops flowing not because something crawled back into the wire, but because the conditions that allowed the field to exist vanished. This is an important lesson. The energy of your life does not reside in the actions alone. It resides in the conditions that surround the action. Remove the supporting environment, your routines, your motivations, your clarity, and the energy collapses. Maintain those conditions. And even when you are tired or uncertain, the invisible field continues to guide your energy toward meaningful results. Look again at the wire and the surrounding field. The wire is necessary, but not sufficient. The electrons inside the wire enable the field, but they are not the field. The field carries the energy. This is a reminder that the visible structure of your life, your job, your schedule, your tasks is necessary, but not sufficient. The invisible structure, your focus, your habits, your relationships, your understanding carries the real power. When people try to improve their lives only by changing the visible structure, they are like someone who polishes the wire but ignores the field. They wonder why they feel more organized but no more energized. They are fixing the wrong part of the system. Another fascinating aspect of the energy flow is that it doesn't require a physical tunnel or pipe. The energy flows freely through the space around the wire because the field defines the path over empty space. This means the energy obeys laws, not walls. It follows patterns, not pipes. This is a powerful idea. In your own life, the energy of creativity, inspiration, motivation, and achievement doesn't need a rigid channel. It needs a clear pattern. It needs principles, not perfect circumstances. You don't need everything lined up. You need a coherent structure of thought and action that guides your energy through uncertainty. You need alignment, not perfection. Think of someone who waits for everything to be perfect before taking action. They're like someone waiting for a wire to be perfectly straight before expecting energy to flow. The universe doesn't care. It cares about the field, the structure, the pattern, the alignment. If the field exists, the energy flows, even if the wire is bent, twisted, or oddly shaped. And in life, if your intentions are aligned, if your habits support your goal, if your environment encourages growth, then the energy of your action flows even when circumstances twist unpredictably. What's truly beautiful is the speed at which energy responds to changes in the field. It's almost instantaneous. Shift the field, and the energy immediately takes the new path. In the same way, when you change your environment, even slightly, reading different books, surrounding yourself with people who challenge you, creating a workspace that encourages focus, you immediately change the flow of your mental energy. You think differently, you act differently, you choose differently. The shift is fast because the shift happens in the invisible field, not in the slow-moving electrons of your daily actions. The idea that energy flows around the wire is also a reminder that the world is richer than the models we grow up with. We love simple explanations because they feel complete, they feel safe. But the real world dances outside those explanations. It refuses to be contained in the simple pictures we draw in our early years. And every time we discover that reality is more complex and more beautiful than we imagined, we grow. We gain a new level of understanding. We learn to look beneath the surface. We become willing to trade convenience of thought for accuracy of understanding. This is not just a lesson in physics. It is a lesson in humility. It is a lesson in curiosity. It is a lesson in the willingness to explore the invisible forces shaping your life. Because the biggest transformations rarely come from rearranging the visible pieces. They come from understanding and reshaping the invisible field around them. They come from changing how you think, what you believe, who you listen to, what you question, and how you interpret the world. Consider the space around a wire in a circuit. It looks empty, but that emptiness is where the energy moves. It is filled with structure and activity, invisible to your eyes, but essential to everything happening in the circuit. In your life, the quiet spaces, your thoughts, your beliefs, your environment, your influences are where the energy moves. They may look empty. They may seem insignificant, but they are the fields through which your potential travels If you ignore the field, you misunderstand the system. If you ignore the invisible parts of your life, you misunderstand your own progress. The visible wire is not the story. The field around it is. Energy flows around the wire, not in it. And understanding that simple truth opens the door to understanding how energy flows through your life. It opens the door to seeing the world not as a collection of solid objects, but as a landscape of invisible forces guiding every motion, shaping every possibility, determining every outcome. And once you learn to shape the invisible, the energy that surrounds, you begin to follow paths you once thought impossible.